Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to the channel where we talk about economics and crypto and lots of other fun things. Before we dive on into this, do me a favor, hit that like button, turn on the subscribe button as well if you have not already. Trust me, this channel is worth it. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive on into this. I want to, in the few words, I think this post summarizes a lot of my general mindset right now. Because if you don't remember, let me just do a quick recap. Heading into 2025, everyone was bullish. Everyone was telling you that 2025 was going to be the year of life-changing gains, and I was a bear. I was of a mindset, and this was a thesis that was developed in 2022, that we were going to see the stock market enter a bear market, and that the entire year that's how it was going to play itself out. And what happened instead? Well, earlier on in the year, it certainly looked like we were heading in that direction. And at some point, I was a short-term bull, expecting the stock market and crypto to put in a lower high, maybe a new all-time high for Bitcoin. But instead of putting in that lower high, what we saw was a V-shaped recovery. And so there was a perfect invalidation of my thesis. I think that day is eventually coming, and coming somewhat soon, but we have time. But what happens instead? Well, okay, so we have the invalidation. And now where do we go from here? Well, honestly, I think it's setting up very similar to 1999, in which we had a blow off top. And so now I'm of the mindset that we are going to have a blow off top. A couple of tweets here. There's just, I think this sums it up in a few words very well, what I'm thinking. And it says this: none of this will end well. Okay, short term meaning even like the next year, I think we have time to hopefully be like ants gathering for the winter. But none of this will end well. They're going to move us into melt up mode with cuts into inflation. Huge. This will push equities, risk assets, and Bitcoin higher, but once it begins to weigh on the long end and currency, it will have to get unwound. This is where the bear market begins. For now, bullish, and I'm holding equity longs because we print higher first. My entire mindset. And then we see a tweet from Will Clemente here. He's a big deal in 2021, even though he was 19 years old in 2021. Core goods and services are creeping up while people are touting headline. ETH ripping, top signals everywhere. This is 2021 all over again. Inflation will get too hot, then the Fed will overcompensate. Listen, if I were in charge of the Federal Reserve, you know what I would do right now? I would not lower rates. I would raise rates. I know that sounds crazy, but it shouldn't sound crazy. Things are doing just fine with rates high. We're going to lower rates. They're not doing just fine, but the numbers, aside from, we've seen some weak employment lately, the numbers are showing us not quite a boom, but at least the appearance of a boom, and they're going to cut rates. All right, well, short term, that's good for us. Long term, we'll see. I don't know, man. Long term, what should I say? Like more than a year. I think we've got a year. And maybe not a year in crypto, but a year in the stock market. So keep that in mind. Now, all right, let's zoom in a little bit. These next two tweets kind of paint a picture that we might be making a move back down in Bitcoin. But what does that mean? Excuse me. Because Ethereum is a runaway freight train right now. And I think a move down in Bitcoin is really not going to have that much of an effect on Ethereum. So, okay, we've laid that out. But from Dark Frost here, in the short term, we are currently seeing a strong decrease in buying pressure coming from the derivatives market. The net taker volume is largely negative today, indicating that buy-side position volumes have significantly decreased on the 30-day moving average. This is quite an effective tool to help read what's happening in the derivatives order book and extract prevailing sentiment. This is a rather negative sign in the short term. We're talking days and weeks, not months. But it can also help in preparing a buying strategy when it reaches critical levels like today's. However, it's important first to wait for buying pressure to start coming back and for this negative value to begin decreasing. So net taker volume, what do you see? When you see red around peaks, right? You're seeing red around peaks. That's a sign that I'm not talking about a local top. Especially, sure, 2021, lots of net taker volume, much more muted this time around. There was definitely some profit taking at each peak. And so this seems pretty normal where we are right now. You see when we got to 112, net taker volume increased. decent amount. Well, here we have a pretty significant increase. And so what does that mean? That means that we may be at the early stages of some form of very short-term distribution for Bitcoin. So where do we go from here? Well, here's a chart from Axel Adler. Above all-time high, there are a lot of bears starting to short the market. This is visible in the daily candles at the all-time high level. The market wouldn't mind another correction down to 112 or 110. I tend to think that the absolute worst case scenario for Bitcoin over the next week or 2 weeks, something like that, would be a move down, another back test of that previous all-time high. What does that mean for Ethereum? Well, the spot Bitcoin ETFs, the spot Ethereum ETFs, they added 2 days ago from when you're watching this video, over $1 billion of Ethereum. So this move down with Bitcoin, if that's what we're going to get, I tend to think would be accompanied by Ethereum either being flat or just continuing to rise, honestly, and Bitcoin dominance going down. So that Bitcoin would really, Ethereum is really running the show right now in many ways that Bitcoin ran the show over the last year and a half. And so I don't think our altcoin holdings would be in that much danger if Bitcoin made a move down to 112, which I am telling you again is the worst case scenario. And I don't think it's going to happen that low. I am thinking maybe mid 1 teens if that's where we go. Reason why, another tweet from Axel Adler, actually, even though Bitcoin has risen to its all-time high, the realized P&L ratio remains around its average level. So what's that? We're going to look at comparisons to earlier peaks this cycle. With this structure, the risk of a sharp trend reversal is notably lower than during past P&L peaks when the market was in an overheated state. So you can see big peak. I would say that if there was a peak of euphoria in Bitcoin and in the crypto market, it was early 2024. That was when things got the most intense. That was when personally my portfolio saw the most X's. And so you can see that. You could see significant realized profit loss, the realized profits being significantly higher at that point. And then in November, December of 2024, a lower peak. And then recently at $123,000, a lower peak. And then where are we now with Bitcoin hovering around $120,000? We're just kind of in a neutral territory. It's perfectly fine. And so what does that move down look like if we're going to get that move down? Again, if we are going to get that move down in Bitcoin, nothing to cry about, honestly. Just another opportunity to buy the dip. I'm firmly convinced of that. So we honestly, guys, we have, in terms of dollars at least, we have a decent amount higher to go. Now, the total crypto market cap is $4.1 trillion as of the day that I'm making this video. I initially projected a $7 trillion market cap. Now, that might be a little disappointing because you're thinking, oh, that's less than a 2x. But think about this. Bitcoin, if my projection of $7 trillion is right, which sure, it could go higher than that, but if it's right, Bitcoin's share of that would be very insignificant in comparison to the share among altcoins. So anyway, we are in a perfectly fine position. Charles Edwards, another reason why we are in a perfectly fine position. Let's take a look at this. Bitcoin is a long way from the top based on the classic copper-gold ratio. This is a classic equities risk-on/off metric. We are currently closer to a buy signal than a sell signal. Copper gold, it's not something, I've talked about this on this channel before. It's not something that you would tend to think would have much of a shedding any kind of light in terms of risk on versus risk off. But if you think about, okay, if copper is increasing in price in its gold chart, that is a sign of industrial activity, okay? So industrial activity is increasing. There is more confidence in the market, more production in the market. And so that is a sign that yeah, we are risk on. And so let's look at this chart here. You could see each peak in Bitcoin, what do you want to call it? Blow off top. All right. In 2021, it was the case. The line's at a different point, but in 2021, that was the case. We were much higher in the copper price in gold. And in 2017, it was at a peak when Bitcoin peaked. In 2013, same deal, at a peak when Bitcoin peaked. That's a really fascinating indicator to me, and it's not something that a lot of people pay attention to. Gold, over the last 4 years, has been dominating copper. And so what does that mean? I mean, honestly, this chart, I know a lot of us are talking about a peak in 2025, but this chart would communicate something that actually, so Bitcoin at least is probably going to peak later on in this cycle and not in 2025. So that's kind of and I've talked about that too. I think the all-time high for this cycle is probably, for Bitcoin at least, probably going to be closer to the next halving than the previous one. I think the stars are aligned very well for that to be true. And so what does a bear market look like for Bitcoin? For altcoins, a bear market could look terrible. I mean, look at where we are with altcoins now. People are still really down. But for Bitcoin, and probably for Ethereum too, a bear market would probably be a fake out. It would be a situation where people are expecting Bitcoin to go a lot lower than it goes, and then blow off top, second blow off top. I don't know, but for altcoins, I would say blow off top sooner rather than later. So anyway, we have from Quentin here. Quentin, very well-known chart stealer, retail sells ETH. Large investors are loading their bags. This was fascinating to me. Oh my goodness, look at this. So we have retail holdings of Ethereum, and we have institutional holdings of Ethereum, and then we have the price. So, or large investor holding of Ethereum. So retail holdings of Ethereum peaked in 2020, and it's just been going straight down since then. Large investor, including institutional, that's going parabolic. They're going in two different directions. Right now, Ethereum retail holdings of Ethereum is going it's plummeting. Institutional holdings of Ethereum is going in a straight line. Interesting, very interesting to me. So it is what it is. I mean, like I said, there's been major inflows to the spot Ethereum ETF. And I'll be honest with you, I loaded up on some. I bought about 220 shares of the BlackRock ETF. And what I'm doing is I'm selling covered calls on that because the premiums are really high. And I may end up regretting that. But I think there's a play there. And so I did that instead of buying Ethereum on Robinhood or transferring out of Robinhood, because I didn't want to deal with tax implications of transferring crypto out and then transferring it back and all that stuff, So that's my play, and I'm really hopeful about it. Anyway, very fascinating chart here. Let's go back to decode, not back to decode, but something, again, this would favor a blow off top scenario in the stock market, in Bitcoin, hopefully in altcoins as well. But DXY will continue its descent as risk assets rise. And so you can see some Elliott wave stuff going on here. And we are in this is a 2-year ABC correction in the DXY. So perhaps we are A, B, C, and then C losing. I've talked about this on this channel as well. C losing, the C wave of this losing a 20+ year trend line. Whoo! Oh man, if this happened, which it very much may be that happens, then the amount of risk on activity is going to be very significant. So ABC correction, but that ABC correction is a 3-year wave, a 2 to 3 year wave. So, oh man, if we see the DXY, here's a number for you. If you see the DXY around 96, we may be off to the races. So again, what did I talk about earlier in this video? Short term, maybe the next year, and maybe for all of crypto as well. Very bullish. But then what happens after an ABC correction? This is just simple Elliott wave stuff. Well, another wave higher where the DXY would probably rise significantly. So we'll see how that plays itself out. But crazy stuff here. Monetary policy, I agree 100% with Charlie Bilello, but it's not going to happen. I agree, and it's not going to happen. So monetary policy should remain tight until the 11% additional inflation we've had since January 2020 above the 2% trend line is erased. There's no point in having an inflation target if you're not going to adhere to it. The Fed should not be cutting rates at all this year. Now, with the greed in my heart, of course, I'm going to say I want the Fed to cut rates because of what that means, the implications of what that means as far as could we become rich beyond our wildest dreams. Sure, you know what? Let's say that. Now greed's going to take a hold of a lot of people, and people are going to get wrecked on the other side of that. But again, if I were calling the shots, I would not be cutting rates in September, and they are going to cut rates in September. And this is a good visualization as to why. I mean, this is if inflation was purely at 2% this entire time, we'd be in a much healthier spot. But where's inflation? I mean, inflation is much higher than that 2% trend line. So that would involve some short-term pain, but whatever, you know. All right, let's look at some charts here. Ethereum's at $4,500. Favorable CPI report, which means they're going to cut rates. You know, they're even more so. That means they're going to cut rates. And so Ethereum responded very well to that. The crypto market responded very well, but mostly Ethereum has responded well to that. People asked me, Alex, you know, why are altcoins not pumping? Well, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. The institutions, they're buying Ethereum. They bought $1 billion of Ethereum, you know? So they're buying Ethereum, okay? They're not putting that $1 billion towards anything else other than Ethereum. They bought $178 million worth of Bitcoin yesterday. That's still phenomenal. But $1 billion of ETH versus $178 million of Ethereum. Yeah, this is what's going to happen with Ethereum's chart. It's going to go higher. And, RSI, I'm so scared because the RSI, I don't care. You know, even we could say, hey, oh no, there's a bearish divergence on the RSI. You can see that big spike in the RSI. And then, oh no, we hit a higher high in Ethereum's price, but we're not, whatever. Guys, Ethereum is going into price discovery. It's going to break its all-time high. It's probably going to happen this month, despite even a correction to 112 or 115 in Bitcoin. Bitcoin, really a lot of resistance at 120. It's tried to break through 120 multiple times. And I shared with you that chart from Axel Adler. A lot of people are they're shorting the market. Here we go. A lot of bears shorting the market at around 120. And so we haven't been able to break through 120, at least as I'm making this video. We'll see where we go from here. Bitcoin dominance is plummeting. Ethereum dominance is rising. All right, let's go. Rismus. Sorry, I don't know what to do with this. You know, this is a little too much too soon, but I'm holding because Rismus can go a lot higher. If you have no idea, I've been talking about Rismus for months and accumulating it and seeing a pretty sure thing for a 10x. And well, when did I start buying? Sorry, like something like April, May, maybe early June, something like that. And here we are now. I mean, man, this is going a little too hot too soon, but we'll see where we go from here. All right, anyway, that's all I have for today. I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll most certainly be seeing you in another video. Peace.